Hi everyone, I work on the device repair operations team at Microsoft, and today we will be tearing down and reassembling the new Surface Pro 10 for business. This may look familiar as there are many similarities to the Pro 9 teardown process. However, the team made improvements and implemented wayfinding markings in the device and on the packaging to help differentiate screws and parts and hopefully ease repair difficulty. Detailed instructions and safety guidelines are available in the service guide, which are posted on the Microsoft support site. Repairs should be performed on an ESD work surface with grounding, so we'll get that set up, to protect the unit. Additionally, we recommend removing jewelry such as watches and rings and tying back long hair. First, make sure the device is unplugged from power and turn off before beginning. The tools needed for both disassembly and reassembly are a metric ruler, nylon spudger, ESD safe tweezers, plastic opening tool, 3mm Allen key, Phillips #1, 3IP Torx Plus screwdriver, cleaning swabs, isopropyl alcohol 91% or greater IPA, and microfiber cloth. For display removal, we will use a display debonding tool and 2 in-spring clamps. For display reassembly, we will use a display bonding frame which comes with a foam pad that we will use and approximately 32 kilograms weight. In this video, we will use the recommended ruck weights. For kickstand reassembly, we will use Loctite 7649 and Loctite 243 thread locker. All tools and materials are available for purchase on iFixit. First, we will remove the SSD. This also triggers a battery shutdown to the device to make sure power is not flowing during the repair, so this is step 1 for almost all repairs. We'll flip open the kickstand here to access the SSD. Press your finger on the divot to open and remove the SSD door. The SSD is now exposed. Using the 3IP screwdriver, remove the screw. The SSD can be disconnected and removed with the help of the plastic opening tool. We will set it aside on our ESD safe surface, and next we will remove the display. We will start by preparing the display debonding tool. We recommend using this tool to reduce the risk of display damage and preserve the display for reuse while performing replacement of internal components. Using the ruler, mark 2 lines from the tip at 2mm and 8mm. This will help us ensure we do not damage anything internally in this process. We will place the guitar pick inside of the debonding tool and assemble both parts of the tool with a Phillips #1 driver. When placing the pick into the tool, be sure that your lines are facing away from you when putting it down into the tool. Now we'll change the bit and adjust the depth of our tool to the 2mm line so that it's aligned with the top surface of the tool. We will first cut through the adhesive around the whole device using this setting. Mount the debonding tool to your work surface with the clamps. Using the plastic opening tool, gently run it through the insertion points to prepare it for the debonding tool. Generally speaking, we recommend going into the speaker sides and loosening that speaker mesh in there. You'll find a little resistance where the architecture actually has some solid points in there, but you should be able to loosen the rest of the speaker mesh. To start the debonding process, hold the device with both hands and insert the opening pick into the right side speaker mesh. This will be our entry point to the device. Push the device to the right to cut the adhesive. You can push it side to side on each edge to ensure that adhesive is cut. When you get to the corners, turn it accordingly and continue cutting through on all edges. For the top edge, it is normal to expect more resistance due to the cameras. If you pop out, like I just did, the best thing to do is to start back at that right speaker, just to be safe. It'll also help ensure that that adhesive is cut as you retrace your steps. After cutting through all edges with a 2mm depth, change the opening pick depth to 8mm. This change in depth is only for the top edge. We will then set the device flat and carefully separate the display from the enclosure. You may use the opening pick to assist in separating residual adhesive that is still stuck. Be careful as you lift it out because of the FPC connection. Flip the display and lay it on the bottom edge. Next, we will disconnect the display from the motherboard. Remove the shield tape using tweezers. Next, remove the shield using tweezers by lifting at the corners. Once the display is free, gently move it to a soft, lint-free place to keep it safe and prevent damage. Now that the display has been removed, let's square up our device to make working on it a little bit easier. And let's begin removing any residual adhesive from the PSA. If you can get a little corner started, it makes it much easier to peel off the PSA in one strip. At this point, since all of my PSA has been removed from the lower half of the device, I'm going to install the battery protective cover while we work on other parts. Next, we will remove the Surface Connect cable. This is the charging port of the device. The cable is attached with 2 screws on the right end, adhesive in the middle cable area, and a connector on the motherboard. Using a plastic opening tool, disengage the latch and then pull out the left end of the cable to disconnect it from the motherboard. With the latch open, you want to gently move it to this direction. You might have to work against the adhesive just a little bit here as you disengage. Remove the 2 screws on the right end of the cable using the 3IP driver. These screws are labeled with a lightning icon to represent the charging port. Note, this connector is magnetic, so be careful when removing the screws as they might get attached to it. Next, starting on the left side, slowly peel off the cable until it comes free. Next, we will remove the speakers. Let's start with the one on the left. Remove 3 screws with the 3IP driver. These screws are labeled with a volume icon to represent the speakers. Lift the speaker out of the device. Moving to the right speaker, remove 3 screws with the 3IP driver. Carefully bend back the graphite sheet on top to reveal the part and screws, but do not separate the black sheet from the thermal module. When you're done, carefully lift the speaker out of the device. Next, we will remove the buttons. This step includes the power and volume buttons and the mini PCB dedicated to them. The spare part offered allows users to replace all these parts. Remove the tape and foam that spans across the button board and thermal module. Remove the button board by removing 2 screws with the 3IP driver. These screws are labeled with a button icon to represent the buttons. And finally, remove the board and set it aside. Peel back the NFC module. Using a nylon spudger, carefully peel back the NFC module to expose the buttons. Do not remove the NFC module. Carefully clean the PSA off the bottom of the NFC with IPA and clean swabs. Next, we will remove the retention clips, keeping the buttons in place. Insert tweezers in the enclosure opening and apply a light upward force. The clips will snap off. These clips will not be reused. We will use new ones during reassembly. Next, push the buttons out of the enclosure. It's helpful to remember for the volume one, which is up and which is down, the plus and the minus. The plus should be closest to the edge of the device. Since we will be reusing the button board, using IPA and cleaning swabs, clean any residual tape from the bottom edge of the board. Next, we will remove the thermal module. This acts as a heat sink for the device. Remove the shielding tape on the left edge. Next, remove the tape and foam at the top edge. Next, we will disconnect the fan from the motherboard. Using tweezers, lift the latch and pull out the FPC from behind. Finally, to remove the thermal module, we will remove 14 screws using the 3 IP driver. These screws are labeled with a thermometer to represent the thermal module. We will also need to temporarily remove the battery cover to access some of the screws. Using the plastic opening tool, gently lift at the edges to separate the thermal pad on the motherboard from the thermal module. Using both hands, lift and remove the thermal module. Next, we will remove the microphone module. First, we will remove 2 shields to access the connections to the motherboard. Using tweezers, gently lift at the corners until the shields pop off. Using the spudger, disconnect 3 of the FPCs. Starting from the left, we will disconnect the first, second, and last FPC. Next, remove 4 screws with the 3 IP driver from the module. These screws are labeled with a microphone to represent the microphone module. Carefully lift it out of the device. By removing the microphone module, we have located the front-facing camera and rear-facing camera. We will remove those next. Since we are reusing the front-facing camera, install the camera cover on top. Disconnect the rear-facing camera connection to the motherboard. Remove 2 screws using the 3 IP driver. These screws are labeled with a camera icon to represent the rear-facing camera. For the front-facing camera, we will start by disconnecting its connection to the motherboard too. This camera is adhered to the enclosure, so we will use the plastic opening tool for removal. Position it under the FPC and gently lift up as you see the camera start to separate from the enclosure. Be careful not to damage the FPC if you are reusing the camera. Remove any residual adhesive from the enclosure and camera and clean with IPA. Next, we will remove the motherboard. We will start by removing the tape and foam in the bottom left region. Next, we will disconnect everything from the motherboard. 2 coax cables in the top right region and the battery connector in the bottom right region. Using the plastic opening tool, disconnect the coax cables. Then using the spudger, disconnect the battery. Lastly, remove 5 screws with the 3 IP driver. These screws are labeled with an integrated circuit to represent the motherboard. To remove it, tilt the motherboard and then lift it out. This way the USB ports come free from the enclosure first. Since we're reusing the motherboard, using IPA and cleaning squabs, clean any residual thermal material from the main chip area. Now we have the battery as the remaining part. During an enclosure replacement, you will need to remove everything from the device, including the antenna boards and fan duct bracket. These parts would be reused and installed in your new enclosure. We will go through that removal first and then take the battery out at the end. First, we will remove the foam from the cable area. Next, remove 6 screws with the 3 IP driver to remove the antenna boards on the left and right. The coax cables are soldered on these boards, so be careful not to separate them during removal. Keep them aside for reuse. Finally, remove 1 screw with the 3 IP driver to remove the fan duct bracket. Keep it aside for reuse. And finally, we will remove the battery. Remove 9 screws with the 3 IP driver. Lift the battery out of the enclosure and set aside by grabbing the frame from the sides. Put it safely away from other objects and on a stable surface. Be careful to only handle the battery by the frame on the sides. Also note to always protect the battery from accidental pokes, impact, and bends during repair, and account for all screws upon completion of the repair. Clean any residual tape and adhesive on the enclosure. Congrats! We have successfully disassembled everything. We will disassemble and reassemble the kickstand after putting the device back together. Now we will begin reassembly. For reassembly, we will use a plastic spudger, ESD-safe tweezers, a 3 IP Torque Plus driver, T-putty syringe, cleaning swab, lint-free cloth, a battery cover, ruck weights 32 kilograms, a foam pad, display bonding frame, and IPA 91% or greater. Collateral such as screws, tapes, foams, and adhesives will be replaced with new ones provided in the kit. The screw bags have the same wayfinding icons to help differentiate screws. Some have dash numbers, as some parts have multiple screws, and they define the order of assembly. We will start with the battery. Lift the battery from the sides and install it in the enclosure. Be careful to only handle the battery by the frame on the sides. Also note to always protect the battery from accidental pokes, impact, and bends during repair, and account for all screws upon completion of the repair. I'll start by grabbing my battery free. And it will be sealed inside of here. You'll notice also that it has these little loop handling icons here, which we will utilize. So it's got these handling loops here that say lift, so we will do that. And gently place it into the frame. So we don't have those, obviously, on the original battery, but I will take the original battery now and place that back into the packaging where this one just came from. and then we will properly seal this up and dispose of it according to our local regulations at a later time. New screws should be used whenever reassembling your device. We have included wayfinding symbols in this device, on the screw bags, and in the service guide. We have laid out the screws we need ahead of time for this guide. Now, fasten 9 screws with the 3 IP driver along the edge of the battery, labeled as -1 in the service guide and on the screw bag. Next, fasten 1 screw with the 3 IP driver near the battery connector, labeled as -2 in the service guide and screw bag. Now that the screws have been fastened, you can remove the liner and gently grab either the tab on the right or the left and slowly peel it away from the battery. With the liner now removed, we'll want to replace the battery cover while we are conducting the rest of our reassembly. Next, we will reinstall the antenna boards and fan duct bracket. Install the fan duct bracket using 1 screw with the 3 IP driver. Next, we will replace the fan duct foam. It's incredibly small, so be careful as you're placing it. As you can see, it can jump around, and that's now in place. Install both antenna boards using 3 screws each with the 3 IP driver. Moving to the left antenna board now. Now that the antenna boards are installed, we will install the motherboard. Be careful during this step to ensure the coax cables and battery connector are not trapped underneath the board as you're replacing it. Tilt the motherboard to the left to slide the USB connectors into the enclosure first. Watch out for those coax cables and the battery connector. You can see I've used my spudger here to help keep the battery connector safe, and the board is now seated. Reassemble the battery connector, and I'll just press that down into there. At this point, I'm going to put 1 of the screws in that's right next to the coax cables, otherwise they might be slightly in the way. Reassemble and route the coax cables and reconnect to the motherboard. Once the coax cables have been pressed into place, gently put them through the guide sections. You can see here and here, and then for the right one, that one goes in right there. Now that the cables and the connectors have been connected properly, we will install the remaining 3 screws with the 3 IP driver labeled as -1 in the service guide and bag. Then install 1 screw with the 3 IP driver labeled as -2 in the service guide and bag. Slightly remove the battery cover to access that one. And the motherboard is now in place. Install a new fan duct foam on top of the right coax cable. I'm going to gently clean off the place where the front-facing camera will rest before we reapply our adhesive. Next, we will reassemble the cameras and microphone module. Starting with the front-facing camera, install the new sheet of adhesive on the enclosure. Press on the adhesive for 10 seconds. Remove the top liner. Align and install the front camera. Press on the sides of the camera for 10 seconds. Reconnect the FPC to the motherboard. Next, reassemble the rear camera in the enclosure. Fasten 2 screws with the 3IP driver. Reconnect the FPC to the motherboard. Finally, we will install the microphone module on top. First, dispense T-putty on the enclosure. Press on half a tick mark of T-putty in this location. You don't need a lot. Remove the front camera cover before moving on. Assemble the module on top. Fasten 4 screws with the 3IP driver and reconnect the FPCs to the motherboard. Next, be sure that the 3 FPCs are firmly in place. All of these FPCs that we're putting in, the 2 far left and the far right, all are connected to our mic deck, and that will make sure that it functions properly. We will now install the camera shields to finish installation of these parts. Next, we will reassemble the speakers. Install the speakers and fasten 3 screws each with a 3IP driver. All right, the speakers are in. We will next install the thermal module. First, we will be sure that we have a clean thermal module before installing new thermal pads. Remove and clean the thermal pads and material from the backside of the thermal module. I've done that ahead of time, so we will start with our clean thermal module. We will reapply 2 of the pads to the thermal module. We will place another thermal pad for the main chip directly on the motherboard. The thermal pad shape may look different on the ARM version. Once all 3 pads are accounted for and installed, reassemble the thermal module on top of the motherboard. We will have to remove the battery cover to do so. We will install 14 screws. There are 4 types of screws, so we will start with the one labeled with -1 and work our way to -4 as shown in the service guide and on the screw bags. The 4 central screws on the chip should be installed like an X. You'll notice that I am using the X pattern here, but I'm not going to tighten them all the way just yet. We'll come back and finish tightening them once the X pattern is in. I'm going to make one slight alteration from what my finger showed you. Instead of going here, I'm going to go here because it's a little further away to help support that X pattern. All right, now I'm going to go back to the first one and tighten it all the way and cross over to the diagonal side. I'll move left, tighten that one, and finally the upper right. Next, we're going to install the majority of the exterior screws here. Specifically, I'm going to start here on the far middle left, and then one other specific screw that will be second will be up here in the upper right. The rest of these type of screws, you can kind of do them wherever, whenever. I'm going to try to go in a circle as much as I can. Although we will have to skip this. This is a different type of screw, so we'll move over here instead. Next, connect the fan FPC back to the motherboard. You can see it just went in. And then I'll gently move that latch down to lock it in place. Finally, we will apply new tape and foams to the top and side edge of the thermal module. You should be able to see the guide marks on the thermal module where the corners of this tape and foam go. I will start it here and then move my hand out of your way so you can all see this on screen. And then I'll use my tweezers to help seat it. Next, we will do the tape that goes over here. With the tape down, we can now apply the new foam. All right, we will replace this last little piece of tape on the thermal module. Next, we will reassemble the buttons and button board. We will use a new retention clip in this step. Install the power and volume buttons into the enclosure and install the retention clip on top until it clicks. All right, as mentioned before, when taking them out, make sure that the plus side is over here, closest to the corner, when reinstalling these into the device. It'll also make sure that the curve of the button matches the actual device. Then I will install our power button in here. Then I'll grab the new clips here. Before you put it in, make sure that button side that's written on here is facing out towards your buttons before pushing it down into the enclosure. And you should hear that audible click, and if it clicks, you know you're good. And then you can just bend this back and forth until it breaks off, and they're installed. Next, we will reinstall the NFC. Make sure that the new adhesive is on the back, and then just press it into place. Should fit nicely into that enclosure there and cover up the power button. Next, we will reassemble the button board and fasten 2 screws with the 3IP driver. The button board might not feel super secure initially simply because the buttons are actually pushing against it a little bit, so we'll have to give it just a little gentle pressure as we're screwing it back in. And if you want to double check to make sure that it's in, you can press the power button and hear an audible click, and similar with the volume up and volume down. Should make an audible click. Once it is secured, apply new tape and foam along the bottom edge of the button board. Just make sure that this gold strip here is covered by your new tape. And once it is, just press that into place. Finally, we install the last internal component, the Surface Connect cable. Start by applying new adhesive to the back side of the cable. Leave on the liner for now. Insert the left side into the connector on the motherboard. Next, insert the right side into the enclosure and secure it using 2 screws with the 3IP driver. Make sure that once it's seated, you close the latch and press down on that latch to make sure that it's firmly in there. And then you can put the connector through the enclosure as mentioned, and we'll grab those screws. You will want to be careful while installing these screws because of the magnetized part. I'm using the tweezers to kind of help guide things along. Once the sides are secured, remove the liner. Then press down on the cable starting from the left and working your way to the right. Make sure that the cable is pressed flat on the thermal module. Now we will start to reassemble the display. We'll start by cleaning the edges of the enclosure before we start applying the new speaker meshes and the PSA. We'll now install the speaker meshes on each side. Be sure that you are using the correct one. They are made for each unique side. This is the right mesh here. If you look at it in the light really carefully, you'll notice that let me just point this out. These three little notches here, they kind of show up in the mesh on the lower side, and then this side at the top is solid like the enclosure itself. So you know that that's how it matches. You'll have your grip towards the inside of the enclosure, and that's how you can validate that you've got the right piece. I'll peel off the back and then gently guide it into place and press down. Give it some good pressure there. And then when you remove it, it should be in place. We will now repeat the process with the left side. Again, I'll peel the backing off of the speaker mesh and gently line it up, and then press down firmly to make sure that it's seated, and then gently peel that off. Our speaker meshes are now in place. Next, we will apply new adhesive strips on all edges. Make sure the outline matches the edge before removing the liner to reinstall it. Keep the top liner on for now. When you're applying these, you're going to want to initially just remove the clear backing. The blue top side is what you're going to leave on for now. All of that has been applied, so we will next flip the display back onto the bottom edge of the enclosure and reconnect the FPC to the motherboard. We'll install a new shield on top and apply a new piece of shielding tape. Got our display here that we're going to reconnect the FPC. And you heard the click as it went into place. We will now apply a new shield to cover all of that. Get that to click into place on all the different sides. And then finally, we will install a new piece of tape. We will install the display by aligning it on the bottom edge first. When you're ready, remove all liners and press on the display. Ensure the display is flush though with the enclosure. Everything should be flush. You want to ensure that the glass is not sitting over the edge of the enclosure in any spot. And that feels perfectly smooth for this one. So I'll put it back here. Next, we will prepare to apply weight to finish bonding the display. Install the bonding frame, making sure the buttons align with the openings in the frame. With that in place, we will lay the piece of foam on top and add 32 kilograms of weight on top. The weight should be evenly distributed. Keep this on for 2 minutes. Congrats! We have successfully reassembled the entire device. We will end this teardown with a kickstand. First, let's reassemble the RSSD by fastening one screw with a 3IP driver. Let's flip it over again, open the kickstand, we'll grab that RSSD and gently put it into the slot with a little bit of pressure. And then we will replace the cover. And there we have it. Next, to remove the kickstand, open it to 90 degrees and remove 2 screws with the 3IP driver. Now tilt the kickstand down to about 45 degrees and free the kickstand from the hinges. Next, grab the kickstand and slowly slide it out of the enclosure. To reinstall the kickstand, we will start by applying Loctite 7649 activator to the new screws. Let them sit for 2 minutes. Slide the kickstand back into the enclosure and align it back with the screw bosses and hinges. Next, apply a drop of Loctite 249 thread locker after 2 minutes have passed. You may need to open up the kickstand a little bit more so you can get the thread locker in and perhaps tilt the whole device up. Next, we will install these screws with the 3IP driver. Congrats! We have completed disassembly and reassembly of all spare parts that are available for repair. A few things to remember during repair. Review the service guide for guidance on what needs to be removed for access to other parts. During disassembly and reassembly, count screws to ensure the correct number has been removed or installed. Make sure there aren't any screws or foreign objects inside the device, especially near magnets or the battery region. Look for the wayfinding markings to guide you on where to install screws and the quantity. I hope you found this video useful. Check the Microsoft site for more information or to learn about Microsoft's sustainability efforts.